Yeah, so the standard of care for patients with newly diagnosed Philadelphia chromosome positive ALL is a combination of chemotherapy plus a TKI. With that combination, we get historical survival rates of about 30 to 50%. However, we know that when patients are treated with an earlier generation TKI, so a first generation TKI such as imatinib or second generation TKI such as dasatinib, that development of T315I mutations is common, and this can be detected in about 75% of patients at the time of relapse. And so there's a lot of data suggesting that ponatinib is effective both in the frontline setting, and we know that it's also effective against these T315I mutations. So that was the rationale for using ponatinib in particular in this study. And also there's data in the relapsed refractory setting in patients with Ph-positive ALL, showing that blinatumomab is very effective with response rates around 40%, with a high likelihood of achieving MRD negativity. And so our goal was to combine the blinatumomab and ponatinib together in a chemotherapy-free regimen to see if we can safely deliver these drugs to patients with newly diagnosed Ph-positive ALL, and also if we can get durable responses, ideally without the need for transplant in first remission, which has always historically been considered the standard of care for these patients. So the study had two main cohorts, one for patients with newly diagnosed Ph-positive ALL, and then one for patients with relapsed refractory Ph-positive ALL. The study design is such that we start both the ponatinib and the blinatumomab at the same time. Patients receive 5 cycles of blinatumomab at standard doses. This is alongside ponatinib at 30 milligrams daily in cycle 1. And then once patients achieve a complete molecular response, the ponatinib is decreased to 15 milligrams daily. After the 5 cycles of blinatumomab, patients then receive 5 years of ponatinib monotherapy at a dose of 15 milligrams daily. And we also do intrathecal prophylaxis with alternating doses of cytarabine and methotrexate for 12 total cycles, or sorry, 12 total doses, which has been something that we've developed over the last several years for patients with Ph-positive ALL. So in total, we've treated 35 patients, 20 frontline, 10 with relapsed refractory Ph-positive ALL, and then another 5 with CML in lymphoid blast phase. Overall, all but 1 patient responded, so this led to a 96% response rate, so it seemed to be a very effective regimen. Importantly, in the frontline setting, the response rate was 100%, and 85% of patients achieved a complete molecular response, which we know from other studies correlates with an improvement in overall survival. In the relapsed refractory cohort, all but 1 patient responded, so the response rate was 89%, and 88% of responders achieved a complete molecular response. And so these responses translated to very encouraging survival in this early analysis. So the 2-year event-free and overall survival rates in the frontline setting were 93%. In the relapsed refractory setting, the 2-year event-free survival was 41%, and the 2-year overall survival was 53%. It's also important to note that in the frontline cohort, that we didn't transplant any of these patients, and there have been no relapses. So this does seem to be an effective and potentially transplant-sparing regimen for these patients who with newly diagnosed Ph-positive ALL. So the field, as far as treating Ph-positive ALL, is really moving towards, I think, these more chemotherapy-free regimens. There's encouraging data from the DiALVA study from the Italian group with dasatinib and blinatumomab. Again, our rationale was using ponatinib, given the concern for the development of T315I mutations when dasatinib is used. But I think that together, these two studies, strongly support the use of chemotherapy-free regimens for patients of all ages with Ph-positive ALL. And I think also in our study in particular, The fact that we haven't seen any relapses despite none of the patients in the frontline cohort undergoing transplant is strongly suggestive that if we use these very effective chemotherapy-free regimens in the frontline setting, that we can obviate the need for transplant and first remission, which has always historically been considered the standard of care. So essentially, we're moving towards these chemotherapy-free regimens that are curative, potentially in the vast majority of patients, without the need for transplant and first remission, which I think will really be practice changing for this population.